Okay, good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. First thing after a long weekend, it's never easy. So thanks for joining the first launch meeting about our movement and migration into coordinated entry. I see a lot of introductions coming in through the chat. That's great. Thank you. Keep that up. If you haven't done it yet, just go ahead and put your name and your email and then your role in coordinated entry. I'm hoping to just briefly go over some of the timeline and real high level changes, and then I want to leave lots of time for kind of a town hall, more just questions and dialogue about how this might change your workflows and any questions you have, so that we have enough time to kind of work through it, or if follow-ups needed, we can set up a follow-up meeting. So with that, I want to just go into, hopefully you can see my screen here with the timeline. Right now we are in this second phase here, or second step, with the rollout meetings happening this week. So we have the access point meeting today, which is right now. And then later this week, we have a meeting focused on the impact for housing providers. So if you also list housing opportunities with coordinated entry, I encourage you to attend that meeting. And then we have a third meeting that's focused on agencies that aren't yet in coordinated, aren't yet in HMIS, and might want to talk about some of those earlier steps. So hopefully everybody on this call is pretty familiar with HMIS and have programs and projects and users set up in HMIS already. Then the week of December 4th, we will be doing our final review of the prioritization list and finalizing any data. And then on the 9th, we begin, December 9th, we begin the blackout period. So there'll be no new data updated in coordinated entry. We will use the frozen prioritization list to continue with matching during the blackout period, but we won't be doing updates like shelter updates or last contact updates or adding any new assessments. And then the goal is to be live in HMIS by December 23rd. And then we will start pulling our coordinated entry list, which will then be referred to as the community queue, directly from HMIS. And then as I'm going, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and I'll try to get to them throughout as I'm on that topic. If not, then I'll get to them at the end of the review. So then next I wanted to kind of go over, just as to clarify the roles. This is from the 2-in-1 training on HMIS that they had for their monthly webinar. So they have kind of clearly outlined the 3 main roles in coordinated entry. So there's the access points, which is what we're talking about today. And then there's housing agencies is kind of the second role. So those are the agencies seeking to receive referrals from coordinated entry. And then there's the matchmaker, which traditionally has been here in the county, or for families, it's the Family Solutions Collaborative that is the matchmaker. So when we have those match meetings, we follow up and connect the household with the housing provider. Okay. And then I wanted to go over kind of the 3 main steps in the rollout guide we sent last week. It had links to a lot of really great resources about the workflow and training. So I encourage you, it was on page 2 of that. And if you need that document again, please feel free to reach out to me. But it outlined a lot of resources of the workflow. And I've just tried to distill it into kind of a checklist here for those of you that aren't familiar with doing this process in HMIS. So if you're not a family provider, and there's kind of 6 main steps to add a household to the community queue. And at any point, households can stop in this process, right? Not everybody's going to make it onto the community queue. They might be diverted. They may no longer need housing resources. They may be determined as, may not be eligible for or appropriate for the housing resource through coordinated entry. So at any point, people can stop through this process. But if somebody's trying to get on the community queue, the 6 main steps are: the first step is you would complete the client profile and contact information. So we would do the normal search process. If they're already in HMIS, then that's great. We can just continue to use that profile. We don't need to create a new profile. We would want to make sure that all the households members are included in that profile. So you might need to manage the household in HMIS or create additional household members if they're not already in HMIS. And then the contact information tab should be updated so that both coordinated entry and the housing providers have access to communicate with that client when a housing match is made. This can include the client's contact information as well as your own if your agency is kind of off that model. Some agencies like housing providers to continue to work with the case managers as after they get the housing match. So if that's the case, please make sure you include your case manager contact information in that contact information tab in addition to the clients. And then those can be managed over time. You can add an end date to that contact, and it'll also include the last known date that was the accurate contact. And then the second step would be to complete the coordinated entry program entry. So this is adding them to a program in HMIS that's tied to coordinated entry. So this is in addition to your own program entry. So your, for example, a Placentia Navigation Center, you would have your Placentia Navigation program entry and also add the coordinated entry program entry. The third step, once they're in the program, is to complete the coordinated entry assessment and the current living situation assessment. So this assessment is very similar to the assessment that we've been completing. It includes the kind of entry questions, the BI SPDAT, and then the housing preference. If there are some modifications, so I'll be updating the kind of printable version of the assessment for those of you that complete paper versions and supply that to a data entry specialist. But as much as possible, we really are encouraging live data entry. We know that's not possible for everybody, but as much as that can be supported, I encourage it. And anything that we can do to help you support changes to your process or workflow, just let me know so that we can try to get live data entry on the assessment, both for the current living situation and the CES assessment. Then once they've been completing the assessment, you'll continue to work on the coordinated entry verification documents. So this includes at minimum the homeless verification letter, but if it's also applicable, it would also be the disabling condition form. And then those two combined would be the chronically homeless verification. So if it shows the length and the disability, then you would go ahead and upload verification of chronic homelessness into the file documents tab. And then the final step to add them to the queue is to refer them to the queue. In HMIS, there's a kind of a button on the assessment tab to refer them to the queue, and they are now live and active and ready for their housing match in the community queue. The sixth step is just to keep them active. So client updates we're continuing with the 90 days, just like we did in the Excel spreadsheet. Every 90 days at minimum, we need an update. And that can include 4 categories of updates. And you only have to do one. So most people, hopefully they're automatically getting a lot of these through your own program entry. So that would be case notes, completing a check-in, which is just like a last contact date. The third option is completing a current living situation. So that would be changes from unsheltered to shelter, or sheltered to unsheltered. And then the fourth update could be coordinated entry events. So these are things like referrals, completing diversion, things like that. If you're providing a service, adding a service onto HMIS, then that will keep that household active in coordinated entry. Okay, I don't see any questions coming in, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next kind of document I wanted to review with you, which is the housing documents. And as a reminder, I'll follow up with the recording of this session and all the documents that we reviewed. So I just wanted to kind of outline as kind of more of a checklist the housing documents, just so that there's no confusion about any changes. Essentially, we're not changing any of the required documents. So you still have your verification of homelessness is the minimum required. And then the conditionally required documents is verification of disability and verification of chronic homelessness. And then over time, we do have the recommended documents. So again, these are not required to be added to the community queue, but they are extremely helpful as people prepare for their housing referral. So that would be their photo ID, their social security card, any proof of legal residence, their marriage or divorce documents, and then proof of child custody. And on the bottom of this form, we just have some resources and tips about what we're looking for in those documents or how to apply for them. So I'll go ahead and include this in the follow-up documents. And then just as examples, we have the agency third-party verification. As always, you can use your own template or you can use the template that we've created for you. That's at your own discretion, your agency's discretion. We just need to make sure that includes the minimum information of how long they've been homeless, where they've been homeless, and then either your signature if it's the agency signature, if it's a third-party verification, or the client signature if it's self-certification. And then we have the disabling condition form as well. So no changes to that form. You see a question about exits in the chat. I didn't get into the exit. I thought we would just start with entries, but there is a process to exits. So I don't have a document to refer to, but in the rollout package, there's a lot of training materials related to adding people to the queue and removing them. So you do go through an exit process. So if the household is referred to a housing opportunity and they're accepted into that housing opportunity, the housing provider will remove them from the queue. It's once they're housed, they're kind of automatically removed. And then in that program entry and coordinated entry, if they're not accepted to the house, they're referred to housing, but they're not accepted, they'll be returned back to the queue. And then if a household becomes inactive, there's kind of two paths. There's one, we can go ahead and wait for that 90 days and that household will be removed from the queue. And then you would need to remove the household from the program, the coordinated entry program, which is probably just good practice to do at the same time you're exiting them from your program, as long as they're not in another program, transferring from one shelter to another shelter, for example. And then, so there's, they're inactive. And then there's also just those that are getting exited. So they're active, but they're exited and no longer working towards a housing plan. So those ones can also be removed from the queue and the program entry. So we'll have reports in some of those materials. It lists, there's a list of reports that are available. So you'll be able to run so instead of waiting for us to send it out on Friday, which is how we've been doing it, right? We send a prioritization list on Friday, and then on Monday we have the top 10%. Now you'll have access to that to run it whenever you want. It's a great benefit of being an HMIS is now you'll have access directly to the community queue and all the reports to pull at your discretion when you want to review your list and who's tied to you and who might be exited or inactive and you need to reactivate. Okay, so that was the review. I know I'm leaving lots of time here for discussion and dialogue because I'm really hoping that we can kind of get into some of the workflows and any questions people have. I know this is a big change that's happening. So I just want to make sure that you have everything you need to be successful in this process and for all of us to be successful. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and we can hopefully engage in some dialogue. All right. Hello, everybody. All right. So any questions about how this might impact your agency? I know we have some that are newer to coordinated entry and then some that have been on for a while. And this is definitely a change to your workflow.
Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, Stephanie.
So I just wanted to ask, so when a client is exiting the program that, like, let's say that they're exiting our program and they are still connected to another agency, we're going to leave them alone in the queue. If we don't know that they're with another agency, we would exit them from the queue when they are exited from our program.
Right now.
Yes, if we know they're not connected to any other service providers, you would want to exit them across the board, right, from the queue and from the project. If they are connected to another program, there'll be a way to kind of transition. So you'll keep them active, but there's going to be a question on there about which access point they're working with. So you would coordinate with that access point to kind of do a handoff. This will be especially relevant for outreach programs, right? The outreach programs working towards getting them into shelter. Once that shelter connection happens, the shelter program, it might make sense for them to kind of take over the case management of that through coordinated entry. So you probably at referral into the shelter, you'll want to coordinate who's going to take the lead in coordinated entry. And you would change the access point question from, from CityNet to Midnight Mission, for example.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Guess I should have gotten exit information ready. Sorry, wasn't anticipating the exit question so soon.
It's okay. I just, because you kind of touched on it for a second, so I just want to clarify, so I don't exit somebody if, because right now we have so many people that are still connected to like Illumination Foundation and CityNet. I don't want to jeopardize the participants, housing opportunity.
Of course. Yeah, no, it's a great question. I'm regretting I didn't prepare more. It will be a little bit complex in the beginning, but we'll figure it out. The transitions between agencies is always kind of complex because it's not always easy to tell who's working with every provider. Now that coordinated entry will be fully in HMIS, I'm hoping that we'll see most program entries in HMIS, or at least be able to identify through the contact information who else might be working with that household. So I really encourage you to use that contact information tab to note if you're an additional case manager working with that household.
Becca, I have a question. Being completely naive to HMIS, and I know that it's like a shared system, but it's somewhat siloed as far as access as well. So if you're a housing provider or a shelter provider, or can we see each other's information that you would normally not be entering it for CES, but you're in HMIS? So in other words, if I have an outreach team that has somebody that they put into CES, would they know that that person maybe accessed shelter because they would see the other housing information, or would they only know that if that shelter added them to the contact screen in CES?
So
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, in
Okay.
most cases, you will be able to see their program entry. You won't be able to see the entry questions, but you'll be able to see that they have a courtyard program enrollment, for example. The only exception is if that client, when they were kind of enrolling, wanted their information to be private. In those cases, and it's very rare, that whole entry can be set to private, and so you wouldn't even be able to see that they're enrolled in that program. Again, that's really rare. In most cases, consent is given, especially for coordinated entry purposes, because so much of it relies on being able to coordinate across programs. So in those cases you wouldn't, but all others you would see a list of program enrollments and when their entry date was and when their exit date was. So you'll be able to see are they still active at that program or not.
Then my follow-up question too then, is there anything that we can make private in the CES portion? In other words, their disability information, since it mentions diagnosis, can you make the disability verification private, or are there any other fields that we can make private within the CES portion?
I don't believe at this time, but I'm gonna see if Erin has anything to add and put her on the spot here. Anything to add, but I believe within the program entry itself, you can't, unless we agree as a community that it's all is private. Erin, you.
Hi, this is Erin. So the coordinated entry enrollment is, and that program is shared by the agencies that are completing that data entry. So you can't lock down those disability fields within that coordinated entry enrollment because for these purposes, you're all kind of treated as the same agency. If you had a separate enrollment within your own agency just to track like their street outreach portion or whatever, that is specific to your agency and no one else would be able to see that.
And for the disabilities, I know it's still a risk, but we actually don't record the diagnosis. It's just the category of disability.
Well, it's on the form, the category would say mental health or substance
right,
use.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
No,
I mean, it doesn't say exactly your mental health diagnosis, but you've been diagnosed with a mental illness.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Good.
Would other providers that are not in CES, but that are in HMIS be able to see that too? Sorry, I'm getting in the weeds, but I haven't seen the interface and haven't used it. So it raises a lot of questions for me.
Yeah. So how it works is you have to, change kind of your role in coordinate in HMIS to be able to enter into the coordinated entry project. So only agencies that have completed a coordinated entry training, which is online, and Erin's team kind of pushes out those materials. So once you've completed that training and been granted access, then you're able to see the coordinated entry. But other agencies that haven't completed that, they don't have access to that program in HMIS or the project entry. But once you have access to coordinated entry, you would see all the questions because it all cascades into every other entry under that project. Thank you. It looks like there are a few questions coming into the chat, so I'm going to read them. So it says, we do not have to enroll our participants in the CES program if they are already in CES. We only enroll them if they are new to CES. So yeah, you wouldn't want 2 active program entries into any program in HMIS. But if there's a prior coordinated entry project entry that's been exited and now they're returning, you would want to do a new program entry and then a new referral to the community queue. So I think what's really, at least for me, it's kind of a new concept in my brain that I'm trying to wrap around is the concept between program entry and then referring to the community queue. So those are they're related, but they're separate processes in HMIS. So you want to have an active program entry, and then ultimately the goal is to refer them to the community queue. Until they're referred to the community queue, they're not going to get any housing referrals. They won't come up on the community queue list, kind of what we used to call the prioritization list. Okay, and then, and Cynthia, just let me know if there's any follow-up questions on that, or if that wasn't the intent of the question. And then Yolanda, I see, is asking about, as housing navigators, we are reviewing the resources for access points. Since our agencies also offer housing opportunities, should we familiarize ourselves as navigators and case managers with the resources for housing agencies as well? So yes, so you would want, so for every role you play in coordinated entry, whether it's access point, housing provider, or matcher. So now we're expanding who's going to be the matcher in coordinated entry as well, but mostly people on this call are access points or housing providers. If your agency lists housing opportunities with coordinated entry now through our Google form, that is transitioning to HMIS. So you will want to attend the migration meeting that's later this week about housing providers. And it'll be similar format, right? We're going to go briefly over overview, big picture, and then have a dialogue about how that might change your process and workflows. And then the access point, which is today. So anybody who's not attending it, that's on your teams, we'll follow up with a recording, and I would encourage them to watch this and become familiar with the process. It's not changing that much, but it is changing enough where it really is, you're going to want to think through your workflows and how you're getting somebody onto the queue, the community queue. And same thing for housing providers. It's not changing that much, but because it's a different submission process and it's all much more electronic now through HMIS, as a housing provider, you'll also want to be really familiar with where does your role begin, what your responsibilities are in HMIS, because there'll be less kind of offline stuff, less emails about it. It's all electronic through the system, through HMIS. Okay, and then, and that meeting is on, it's on December 2nd, so Wednesday at 1 o'clock, because we're talking about housing providers. And then of course there'll be a recording of that too. So if you're not available, you can always watch the recording later and reach out to me with any questions as well. And then I have office hours every Friday through this migration. So if things come up for you later, or as you start to think about your workflows and think about how this might impact you, you can contact me anytime, of course, but then I do have those reserved time on Friday for specific questions. Okay, then, so Jordan, I see your chat. As far as the transfer goes, will you be transferring everyone over to HMIS who is not inactive, including people who are not currently doc ready for either PSH or rapid rehousing? Well, we need to make sure that at least the verification of homelessness is in HMIS for all clients we want transferred over. Good question. So we're actually transferring everybody who's been active at any time, assessed or otherwise, from July 1st on. Our program year is July 1st for funding purposes. So we're trying to get a whole year's worth of data. For once we get to June, we want to have a full year to report on. So anybody who maybe was just assessed and got exited, for example, in September, they also are going to be imported. So they don't have to be document ready. Of course, ideally, we want everybody, as many people, to be document ready. So don't hold off on doing document readiness. But we are trying to encourage you, even for the documents, don't add the documents, don't create a profile, don't add the documents to HMIS during that blackout. Of course, for your own program, we're not trying to stop your own program entries. You know, if you need to create a profile and add them to your program, please do that. But anything coordinated entry, really, we are asking during that blackout period to really be blacked out. Don't create profiles just to add the documents. Just wait till hopefully the 23rd will be live, and then you can upload any documents you have pending. And then anything before the 9th, just go ahead and upload those. And the 8th will be the last day to let us know by the old method, right? You're emailing coordinated entry and saying, oh, we've uploaded this document. Could you please upload and update the list? If you let us know before the 8th, I think I said by noon, we'll commit to having it be in the upload and be marked as document ready and on the queue. But if we learn after, or they're not document ready there, they'll just be remaining, they'll get the program entry, but not the community queue referral. So those are those two things. So if you want to kind of import it in on the community queue, you want to get us those documents before the 8th. Okay. All right, so then it says from Christine, I see a question. Can you run reports in HMIS on your data to know your prioritization? So yes, so you'll be able to run, because it's shared, it'll be the whole list, not just your own. And then of course you can filter to whomever you want. But yeah, you'll be able to run both kind of a historical list, who was on it and maybe is inactive now that you want to kind of try to get back on, who's the current list and who's coming up. You know, that will be now called the community queue. So the community queue will be what we will prioritize on our Tuesday meetings. So that's the list you'll want to review and have it be kind of ready and prepared to accept those referrals on those Tuesdays. I'm still thinking through and working through how the top 10%, there will be some version of that, but that might be a separate report outside of coordinated entry. So there'll be, it'll be from coordinated entry, from HMIS, I mean, but we might highlight it differently, just kind of how we do now. So there's some things we're still trying to figure out, but the overall whole list will definitely be available in coordinated entry. Let's see. And then, so Stephanie's asked, so can we filter who is inactive? Yeah, there'll also be a report for who's inactive. And then similar, we're still trying to work through what that right now we have a 90-day list. So the people that are kind of approaching their inactivity, we'd like to continue some form of that practice too, just so that we're preventing having to do the work all over again and refer to the community queue. So we're still trying to work through what would that report look like, and you know, how much can you pull it yourself versus do we kind of get that sub list for you and distribute it out by email. As much as possible, we would like it to all be available to everybody through HMIS directly instead of relying on emails like we have been. Yeah, okay, I'm seeing some direct messages, but I'll follow up with those later. Okay, great. Any other questions? Or I'm seeing one more coming through the chat while you're thinking about it. So from Stephanie, are we now completing the VI SPDAT and HMIS, or are we making sure to add them into the queue? So both. The VI SPDAT is in HMIS now. So what's happening is all those Google forms, they're being locked down. So when we have our last moment of accepting new data, they're going to be closed. You won't even be able to get into them to submit data. So everything that used to be submitted through the Google Forms, housing, and the assessments, that will be closed and will all move to HMIS. So any new requests, new assessments, those will be submitted through HMIS. It's not telling you that you can't do the paper ones anymore. As much as we would love to see everything live in HMIS, you can certainly do that. And it's set up to do that, but we'll also still have a printable version for people that you know, aren't able to complete the form live, the assessment live in HMIS. We'll have a printable version that has the kind of HMIS profile information and then all the coordinated entry assessment with the ROI kind of attached as a packet that in theory you could use out in the field, or if you have you know, even if you're at your shelter but you don't have stations for every intake, you can collect those in paper and give those still to a centralized data person if that's your model. Okay. All right. Any questions about ongoing, like how to keep people active? That was a lot of new language for me. So we are all learning this together, of course. And this, once we migrate, I'm envisioning there'll be more of these kinds of meetings too, just as we transition to different phases. Right now, it's really, for me, I'm really trying to focus, how do we get everybody at least enrolled and entered? Then as we transition that first 90 days, it might be more, how do we keep people active? You know, how do we keep them engaged? What updates do we need to be doing, coordinated entry? And as we approach the end of the 90 days, we'll really want to start focusing on those exits, that who should be exited and how, and of course with the housing plans, as they get referred to housing, there'll be an exit process as well. All right. So I do see some just kind of direct messages, like I mentioned before. If you want to set up smaller group just with your team, or maybe like-minded programs, don't hesitate to reach out about that. We can set something up. You know, I just want it to be as successful as possible. So if there's anything I can do to help you through this transition or figure it out, I'm sure there are things I'm not thinking about that would impact you differently than all the other agencies. So if there's anything I can do to help kind of work through those and have it be successful, and what you need to get out of this to have it be as successful as possible, please reach out and I'll make time. I'll make time as much as I can to support you through that. Okay, then let's see. It was a direct message, but I think it will benefit everybody. The question is about if there will be an assessment every 90 days and whether you have to keep track of that. So no, once the person's enrolled and on the community queue, that's their assessment. If there's major changes, just like now, you can update the assessment if that's appropriate. But in general, they'll keep that original assessment for the duration of their time with coordinated entry. What you want to do is do the updates like case notes, just do your regular case notes. There's a check-in button. So on the coordinated entry assessment, there's, like just a button saying, this is the last time I had contact with this client. So if you don't do case notes, but you just want to do this this is my check-in date, that will keep people active. Any service referrals, keep people active. And then kind of a newer data element that's being added for coordinated entry is from HUD is their current living situation. So this is kind of a mini assessment that says where they are. Like, we're just confirming we're still engaging with them on the streets, or we're still engaging with them at the shelter. So it's capturing where they are. So kind of those weird things. And most of them, I think people, if you're already in HMIS, you're probably doing a lot of those already. Right? Hopefully you're already doing case notes, and that in itself will keep people active for as long as we need them to be. And same thing with current living and situation. Hopefully we're checking in with them and knowing where they are so we can find them again as quickly as possible once we get the housing resource. But the assessment itself doesn't need to be redone. It's just these kind of regular case management activities that should be ongoing. Okay. So I see, will we be doing a new training for this new program? So the coordinated entry training is available right now through 2-in-1 OC. So if you don't have access to coordinated entry, I encourage you to do it before the 23rd so that you have access to that program. It'll be added as an additional program to kind of your drop-down list when you sign in, so that you can have immediate access as soon as we're live to add new clients to the coordinated entry project, as well as the community queue. I just rewatched it, and I'm thinking there's probably updates coming. I'm not sure if you have any details about any training materials that might be adjusted or updated, or if people should go ahead and use what's there. She might have ducked out. But a lot of the language is focused on families, but the concepts are the same. So you kind of mentally remove the references to families, the steps are the same. So I encourage you to just do the training. If you need the link, just contact me, email me, but it's also in the rollout documents that I'll be following up as a link in there. So that way you can get familiar with that process, and that works through all the workflows and all the stuff. So I'm not getting into like the how to do it all in this session, because there's so much training materials available through 2-in-1 OC. They're the HMIS administrators, so they're launching out the how-to trainings. You know, what steps do you do, what form, how do you fill out the form, how do you answer this question, that kind of thing. All right. Ooh, Christina is opening the dialogue to others here. I love it. I would love to hear from programs who have used this system before to share their workflows and lessons learned at some point to help us in creating our own. I'd go ahead and open it up here too, if anybody's on that's in the, especially if you're in the family system already, like I know Illumination Foundation. I'm not sure if I saw anybody with Mercy House, but Mercy House is already in both. So you might have some lessons or tips you'd like to share, not to call on anybody.
I think I saw Andrew on here. He's with Illumination, but if I could speak, because we rolled into the HMIS system with the Family Solutions Collaborative initially. So for us, I think the main thing was that there needs to be a lot of communication between agencies. And having the FSC there was really a key point, because we were able to make sure people were communicating and making sure there was follow-up happening. So the great thing with HMIS is that it really is on the case manager or the data person to be updating that information. So it does streamline a lot of processes. But I think one thing a lot of the community, it was like a lesson learned, was that there needs to be a lot more communication happening. So long as that is going on, I think we'll have an easier time. I think because the family group has already started it, a lot of people are going to be used to that. But if you have primarily been an individual focused agency, that's going to definitely be a new learning curve. But other than that, I know that's one thing that comes to mind, but I don't know if Andrew's on here still.
Or Gordon, if you have any input or insight. Okay, well, I agree with the communication. I actually have the opposite concern. I feel like the individual system is, we're so used to communicating by email, which is a lot more kind of present, right, in your everyday. This is really going to transition to electronic communication, like it's through agency admins. So there's kind of key points at each agency, key points of contact at each agency that receives the communication, and it's not widespread, right? So on the individual side, you guys are used to seeing emails with 50 people on them, and here's your housing match, and you guys work it out. It doesn't work that way in HMIS. It's much more targeted. So when your client is matched to a housing resource, for example, it's the agency administrators that are notified through the system automatically. So it doesn't really generate the same kind of email volume, which has its advantages, but it really relies on your agency to have really clear workflows about, okay, when that agency administrator receives that information, who do they inform and what's the next step and who's going to be kind of taking the lead on each step. It doesn't lend itself as well as to like, here world, somebody please take this and take the next step, which is kind of how we've been managing it through emails, is saying, like, here's a huge pool of people, somebody must be able to know what's the next step. So it's a lot more targeted communication. Anybody else have anything to add about how this might have impacted or transitions they've seen as they went through on the family system? Sitting Ed, I'm just noticing you now too, if you have any insights about differences between your family interactions and your individuals. And Fam, I see you're on both too. Okay, but I don't want to make anybody talk, but kind of to Christina's point, if you do have any lessons learned that you'd like to share, feel free here or reach out to me and I can kind of compile tips and tricks learned through other transitions. The family system went through this, a few years ago, 2 years ago. So they're more familiar. That's fresher. They went through this process and we could try to learn some of their lessons. And I'll try to reach out to some of the family providers too to get their kind of tips and tricks. Okay, so then I see requests for resources. Yeah, I'll follow up with those. And then Erin put in the chat for where the training is. So the recorded webinar. That's the webinar. And then there's also a specific training to get access to the program itself. And then Erin's putting in the CES cheat sheet. So these are all good resources. They're all linked on the rollout documents too that I've been sending out. So personally, I just kind of marked them all and started going through them. It was really helpful. It was overwhelming. I'm going to admit that. It was a lot of information. But because I hadn't been through this process, I'm not a family agency, so I hadn't been through it. It was really helpful for me to just kind of, for me, I had to print them out. I know it's not green or anything, but I had to print them out and work through the workflows, and it's kind of like let it sink in about how is this going to change. This is, it's in the weeds, but it's the stuff that's the day-to-day that makes these things operate. And so we really have to be clear about what are the steps and who's doing what, because it's all so behind the scenes now as it's transitioning to HMIS. But also at the same time more visible, because now what's nice is when you log into HMIS, you're going to see right away on that home screen, they're on the queue, they're not on the queue. So it's going to be really obvious as you're managing your programs in HMIS, if you have programs in HMIS, who might need a next step towards their housing plan if they're trying to get to supportive housing and rapid rehousing. You know, you'll see it very visible right on the home screen. All right. Any final thoughts or questions? Feel free to unmute yourself, put them in the chat. If not, I think we covered a lot of information. So hopefully this was helpful to just kind of start the conversation. And like I said, I fully expect this to be a start of the communication. You know, everybody, hopefully you'll take this back to your teams and think through what might need to be changed, what follow-up questions you have, and what resources you need to be successful. And we can continue this conversation over for sure the next month, and of course ongoing as well. Okay, well, thank you everybody for taking your time this morning to kind of go through this and talk through this. And I'm sure we'll be in touch. And like I said, I'll follow up by the end of the week with all the different recordings and documents that we reviewed. All right, thank you. Welcome back.